The Transform tab on the palette contains tools for performing transform operations: move, rotate, and scale. Move, rotate, and scale any geometry type, for example curves, surfaces, and meshes, and control entities such as vertices and edit points. You can also transform grouped objects made up of two or more components. Every object or component has a pivot point. When you apply a transform, the transform is applied with respect to that pivot point. You can relocate the pivot point using the Pivot Point Transform tools. You can constrain transforms to any of the three axes, X, Y, and Z, using the three mouse buttons. First, let's look at the 3D views. In 3D views, the left, middle, and right mouse buttons constrain along the X, Y, and Z axes, respectively. For move, if you drag with the left mouse button, the object moves constrained to the X-axis. For rotate, if you drag with the left mouse button, the object rotates around the X-axis that passes through the pivot point. Similarly, the middle and right buttons constrain along the Y and Z axis, respectively. Scale is an operation independent of the axis. For scale, dragging with any mouse button gives the same result. The object is scaled uniformly. However, non-proportional scale is an axis-dependent transform. It behaves similarly to the Move tool. So you can non-proportionally scale an object along the X-axis by dragging the left mouse button, along the Y-axis with the middle, and along the Z-axis with the right. Now let's look at 2D orthographic views. The axis in line with the view direction is fixed. In these views, the left mouse button moves objects freely. The middle mouse button constrains to the horizontal, and the right mouse button constrains to the vertical. For the Rotate tool, rotation is constrained to the X, Y, and Z axes using the left, middle, and right mouse buttons, similar to 3D views. Scale and non-proportionally scale behave similar to the Move tool. The middle mouse button scales along the horizontal direction. The right mouse button scales along the vertical direction. The left mouse button for scale scales uniformly. For non-proportional scale, it scales freely. Additionally, you can apply transforms using an exact numerical value. For any transform tool, in the prompt line, type the transform values in the order X, Y, and Z. The values can be negative too. You can enter these transform values in two modes. Enter values with respect to the global coordinate origin, which is represented as absolute, or ABS. For example, to move this object 200 units in each direction, type 200, 200, 200, and press Enter. Alternatively, enter values with respect to the pivot of the object, which is represented as relative, or REL. You can quickly switch the mode by typing R on the prompt line and pressing Enter. Type A to switch to absolute. You can also constrain transforms by snapping. There are two types of snapping: snap to the intersection points of the grid, or snap to geometry. Hold the Alt key and click near a grid intersection to snap to that grid intersection. Grid snapping is most common in 2D orthographic views. To snap to geometry, there are two options. Hold Ctrl and click to snap to a specific control entity, for example, an edit point. Hold Ctrl and Alt and click and drag along a surface edge or curve. Notice that when snapping an object or component, its pivot snaps, whereas for control entities like edit points, the control entity itself snaps. Be aware that when you transform a component with construction history, you may get a warning. You can decide to retain history or transform the object. Or instead, you can transform the parent components and the history will remain intact.